Welcome to Moore's Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. My name is Ajmal Binding. I'm the chair of the Moore Board of Directors. For some of you who don't know, Moore stands for Movement and Unlawful Race Equity. And it's a nonprofit board. Our primary mission is to deal with anti-racism, race equity issues in our community and in our state. As I said earlier, Moore is an anti-racist organization fighting for racial equality in communities through engagement, education, and advocacy. And what we've been doing for the past number of months in our organization is bringing a number of interviews and conversations with people in know-how to talk about some of their challenges and issues dealing with social justice, anti-racism work, and more than anything to help inform our community on how to get more involved in those issues. Moore is obviously a nonprofit that seeks to bring advocates and community individuals together who are committed to fighting against this apartheid nature of government and nonprofits in our community and state. With that in mind, we invited Mr. Timothy L. Ashford, who's attorney at law, to talk about some of his anti-racism activities he's been working with to challenge the legal system. The other thing is that he's been dealing with that both in Douglas County and the state of Nebraska. I recall Timothy's program on Cox Cable many years ago on Channel 22, where he was throwing out some heavy light about issues dealing with our community and trying to challenge some of those issues. Timothy Ashford has filed over 8 lawsuits against the Nebraska judicial system, and we'll talk with him today about some of those. Timothy, welcome to Moore, Throwing Down Heavy Light.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Good. I'm glad you're here. Share a little bit more about yourself, because I didn't give a long-winded introduction. A little bit more about yourself that you'd like to share with our viewing audience.
Okay, and I know you from when you went to school with my brothers. Can you hear me?
Right, I hear you good.
All right then. And I'm from Omaha. I went to Omaha Central for a couple of years, graduated from South High, graduated from University of Nebraska. I went to Drake University Law School. I did their 2.5-year program. Then I went out to Colorado and took the bar outside of Nebraska. The bar in Colorado is about 15 points higher than you need to pass it in Nebraska. So that's pretty significant. You know, I had a more difficult time. I've been practicing now for about 30 years. I was a former prosecutor out there, and now I'm a defense attorney. And in the defense of our people, Black people, I defend the poor. I defend a lot of poor whites. I defend Blacks. I defend the downtrodden. I'm also the attorney of record for both Mondo, David Rice, and Edward Poindexter. I was a pro bono attorney for Mondo for about 20 years. And I filed numerous complaints and other things on his behalf over that time period. I got to know him like a brother. I'm now representing Ed Poindexter, and at some point I'm a contact. As soon as we file some more legal actions, I'm going to let you know. Basically, I put the state on notice that we are going to be bringing up some legal action. And as you know, and I know everybody's enlightened here, the United States, we incarcerate more people than any other country in the world. We have about 2.2 million people incarcerated, prisoners. And of that percentage is about 40%. And as you know, we comprise about 10% to 11% of the population. So that's a disproportionate number. I figured it out to be 888,000 or something like that, Blacks in prison. And my job is to try to get them out in terms of, as one of my clients said, I freed more Black people than Harriet Tubman has freed slaves. I don't know if that's true, but I take that as a compliment. And I told another client, I'm not well liked over at the court system because, as you know, back in the Civil War, there were 50% of whites wanted us to be enslaved, 50% wanted us to be free. The civil rights, 50 wanted us not to have rights and 50 wanted us to have rights. Well, it's like that over in Douglas County. 50% of the judges don't go along with equality and fairness in their rulings against Black people, and 50% of them do. There's some great judges over there, but there's some judges who practice racism over there.
So on that note, Timothy, I want to go through a sequence of questions with you and see if we can get some kind of sound bites and as they say, clips to talk to so our listeners can track a little bit. But first, as someone who grew up in North Omaha, particularly dealing with some of the challenges you did going through our educational system, so on, what made you become or what made you decide to become a lawyer since there were so few of them when we were growing up in this apartheid city?
I was 10 years old and I remember the riots. Well, we call it the rebellion. They called it the riots. People in my neighborhood disappeared. I don't know if you remember that. They arrested every Black adult in my neighborhood at one point or another. And I said, I'm gonna go to law school because when they come and arrest me, I'll know the law. That's why I wanted to go to law school. There was this man down the street from me. He disappeared for 10 days. They had him in jail. Now, 1968 was the rebellion, but 1966, they passed a law you've heard about, Miranda v. Arizona. That's where they say you have the right to remain silent. Anything you use can be used against you. And you know those, you've seen it on TV before.
Right, exactly.
Or the movies.
Yeah, Law and Order and all those other
before that
shows.
time, yeah. But before that time, they didn't have to read you your rights. And even then, even though it's passed in 66, it wasn't implemented till 1970. So
that's like the Brown versus Board of Education. Right, got you.
Yeah, right. They were arresting people. So that's the answer to your first question, why I wanted to go into law school. When I got in there, I saw every aspect of the law has racism, is infected by racism. And it's our job as African Americans to get rid of that, to eradicate it.
Right. So. And you shared some documents with me regarding your advocacy efforts to deal with our judicial system in Nebraska, and also the dysfunctional way that they attempted to put you in a box. I'm particularly interested in why so few African-American attorneys defend African-American clients in Douglas County. Share with us a process of what you filed in your lawsuit and challenge not only the county attorney, that apparently what you laid out in this document, they do not pick African-Americans to help with low-income clients who are facing some serious charges. So give me a little bit more background, and also, do you have some numbers support that?
Well, I filed a law. Let me tell you, years ago, I went down and talked to the Chief Justice of the Nebraska Supreme Court. And I said, listen, they're not hiring Black attorneys for court-appointed cases. That basically means you have taxpayer dollars and you're not appointing any Black attorneys. And they didn't do anything about it. So a couple of years later, I filed a lawsuit against the judges of Douglas County Court. And what happened is people said, you can't sue a judge. Well, I didn't get that message. and people have sued judges before. There's a brother out of New York. Here's the deal. You cannot sue a judge if you go in there and he sentences you to 50 years, because the court will be clogged with suits against judges. You can't sue him if he dismisses your civil case, okay? The reason I sued him is under the civil rights statute. And I basically said, listen, Your Honor, if you all are acting in the capacity of an employer where you're discriminating intentionally against Black attorneys by not appointing us to represent poor people in criminal cases, you're acting as an employer. You're not a judge. So if you act like a judge, if you're acting like an employer, you can be sued like an employer. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck, okay? So when I sued it, they dismissed it here. They always dismiss my complaints here. I go up to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is our appellate court, and they sent it back and they said, hey, Mr. Ashford, the one thing you didn't do was you didn't ask us for any money. Oh, okay, my bad. Go back down, refile your lawsuit and tell us how much you want. So that's what I did, okay? I did it, and I got there and I argued with them. I said, listen, Judges are not the only person who can pick and choose attorneys to represent people in court cases. And the state said judges are the only people can pick people for, court appointments and for to be on the murder panel, which I got a lawsuit now to appoint blacks to the murder panel. You have a murder panel.
Tim, help me with that. When you say the murder panel, most people don't know what that means. What does that mean when you use the word
Douglas County murder panel? Okay, they have a panel that what happens is when the two people are involved in a murder, they're co-defendants, right? The court appoints one of them, the one with the most problems, or the one who may be more culpable, or the one who did the most, to the Douglas County Public Defender's Office. Since they can't represent two people involved in the same crime because that's a conflict of interest, the other one gets appointment or gets an attorney appointed from a rotating list of attorneys on the Douglas County murder panel.
Okay, gotcha.
They haven't appointed any blacks to the Douglas County murder panel. It's like the Tuskegee Airmen or the black quarterback in the 1950s. They're arguing you are not qualified. The only qualification they list is you have to have a law license. That's it. And black attorneys do. And the reason I'm fighting that is because it's a lack of diversity, number one, but you get the same old individuals who are representing blacks on that murder panel. And what happened is, and the reason I got interested in this lawsuit is because years ago, I used to get a lot of letters from brothers in prison saying, hey, they appointed me somebody from the Douglas County murder panel, and that person decided talk me into pleading. So when you look at the pattern, about 99% of the people who got outside counsel or were people who were appointed by the murder panel pled. And I'm saying you need to allow blacks on that panel, and they need to be doing more criminal jury trials. That's my argument. So I saw
Tim, let me I'm gonna break it down a little bit, because some people who don't understand the legal system, that when you get a client to plea, obviously you don't go to trial and you basically make it happen faster.
Right.
Would it not be in the interest of the attorney to go through a case or trial and get more money because they spend more money with that? So why this great propensity of these white attorneys to get African Americans to plea or cop to things that they should be helping defend them on? Help me with the concept of playing versus going to trial.
Okay, they are, some of them just aren't really trial attorneys. You have people who are, and they've been appointed to the panel. If you're not going to do a trial and you plead everybody, you need to be off that panel. That's my position.
So what I'm asking is, do you get paid more money if they plead from the government, or if you go through trial?
You get paid more money if you go through trial. But these individuals don't want to do a trial. A lot of them don't. Okay. And my thing is, I'm saying include more blacks on there, just like the Tuskegee Airmen. So these young people will say, let's take it to trial. Right. I want to increase the number of trials. And if you got the same old people who've been up there for 20 years, and I'm going to tell you, you aren't as interested in doing a lot of work in your later years than you are when you're in your 30s and 40s.
No, I understand.
A lot of these people on the panel have been on there for so long that they're like, oh, why don't you plead? And it may be race. It may be they just don't want to do the work, but I'm shaking up the panel.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Now I'm gonna switch up on you again, and I recall one of your documents you shared, you had sent some information out to the media, and one of your documents you talked about this is basically a collusion with racism. What kind of support have you received from the white media and also the so-called media of color in this jurisdiction, this area?
You're the only one who's interviewed me.
So you're making this up?
I'm not making this up. You are there's an attorney who recently died. Every time something happened to him, and I was invited. I was invited to speak with the late James Martin Davis and Clarence Mock. Clarence Mock is an individual who convicted David Kovo of the crime scene investigator of Douglas County. Okay, that was a number of years ago. I was invited by the Nebraska State Bar Association Office for Counsel for Discipline to speak in front of 500 attorneys with those two guys. Now, that shows you, well, if they considered all state and they're good attorneys, what does that make me? I'm a good attorney too. But the media covered almost everything the late James Martin Davis did. But what was more important was the fact that I'm out here fighting for Black people to get on the panel, fighting for more Blacks to be appointed to court cases. And in their appointment, when you're running an office and you're out in business, every dollar counts.
Right.
And if tax dollars are just going to white attorneys and not to you when you pay taxes, that's discrimination. And that's why I filed the lawsuit.
By the way, you mentioned a person's name, and I'm not quite sure if that's the same person. Are you talking about the guy who was who was supposed to inspect crime scenes and he was fabricating stuff years ago?
Yes.
And they had to put him in jail. And
yes.
What was interesting about that, that's probably the first time in history that they put somebody in jail like that. But we know that stuff been going on for years. And all of a sudden, we see this popping up all across the country where this innocent project to show how corrupt the legal system is. And you got these brothers and sisters spending time in prison because you got lazy county attorneys and prosecutors and lazy public pretenders.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I even sent a letter to the innocent project. I says, why don't you clowns go upstream and deal with the law schools and deal with how our system is so corrupt and messed up that you got a guy spending 35, 40, 50 years in jail that he didn't commit or she didn't commit.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're going to find some DNA all of a sudden. I mean, and then in one case in Kansas, or it might have been Missouri, the person died and they didn't even give him a settlement. It was almost like the state ruled against it. I know Missouri has a way now that you got to have DNA involved before they do that, but it was just, so yeah, Omaha had their own case before it became the Innocent Project. I want to ask a different kind of question, and I know that you are.
And let me follow up and do a quick disclaimer. There are some county attorneys over in county office that I like and I respect. They're good people. There's some in the public defender's office. Not everybody over there is bad, but the bad apples, they just destroy it for everybody. Okay.
And I wouldn't particularly, speaking of the local yokels sometimes, because I know nationally I read these articles and I don't know enough of them. I just know there's not enough African Americans and people of color working in government locally. And that's been one of my main pleas as a single voice trying to get in the wilderness to say, hey, if you got 33% of our community being people of color, I shouldn't have to walk or be around where there's no people of color in leadership positions or in these certain key positions. So that's number one. One of the things that you raised in that you talked about the George Bivens case. Now a lot of these young bloods and this new wave have no clue about the stuff, brutality and things that we had in this community. And you talked about George Bivens. Obviously, he was killed by a police officer, a white one. I understand that was complicated up to a point. And I'm aware of Richard Kellum, a small man who has scoliosis of the spine or something. He was beaten to death in the jailhouse by about 5 or 6 police officers, and no one was brought up on charges. And I also found out there was an African-American female who was like in charge of that jail when it went down. One of the brothers who's on the force told me about that. My question to you is, do Negroes in Omaha have, or Black folks have, Negro amnesia? Because this stuff has been happening for years in Omaha, and all of a sudden we see this George Floyd thing, but we know that's been happening to, no one's really been indicted. I'm not even aware of the person who killed Vivian Strong. I don't think he spent a day in jail. The guy who shot her when she was 14 years old. But talk to me a little bit about what's going on from your vantage point and why you bring George Bivens up in this situation.
Well, I was an assistant special prosecutor to do the investigation in the George Bivens case. And let me break it down to all my brothers and sisters out there and all people in the city of Omaha. At that point, Senator Ernie Chambers, before the George Floyd case, he had drafted an ordinance or a statute which says if anybody is killed in police custody, a special prosecutor will be appointed. Now, why is that important? Because the county attorney works with all the police officers all the time. They're friends. So what the Senator Chambers drafted the ordinance for is so that you can bring out outside an outside special prosecutor, somebody independent, somebody who doesn't work with the police department. So me and this other guy from Lincoln were chosen as assistant special prosecutor. And when we started the case, to make a long story short, the Douglas County Attorney's Office started filing motions when it was really our jurisdiction to file motions and to prosecute as a special prosecutor, assistant special prosecutor, okay? So the court would appoint two people in this case to investigate and bring manslaughter charges against the police officer who killed George Bivens. So we were interfered with by Douglas County when we were doing our job. The grand jury returned a no true bill, which means they didn't find any illegal evidence of manslaughter, any evidence of manslaughter or any other crime being committed. And that was their right, okay? But the fact of the matter is, since George Floyd came up, and between 2002 and 2020, when Scurlock was killed, James Scurlock, they removed the special prosecutor provision from the grand jury, okay? So if the special, and I'm telling, I just had a talk with Terrell McKinney, and I called Justin Wayne. So Justin Wayne, if you're watching, call me back, because I'm gonna meet with these two gentlemen before January, because I want, and the community should want, that provision that says if somebody dies in police custody, which was similar to George Floyd, which was George Floyd, a special prosecutor will be convened, somebody not associated with the county attorney's office or the police union, to investigate independently that crime. And that is very important for our community, because this is going to happen again. Right. Mark my words. And when it does, we need that provision in. So I'm telling both McKinney, I'm gonna meet with them, and Justin Wayne, we need to meet. Y'all need to put that provision that they took out. And it was taken out during Don Klein's tenure while he was in, okay? So, and let me explain something. There's a plaque outside of Douglas County to Will Brown, the guy lynched in 1919. In 1919, the official government position and the position of everybody else is Will Brown was terrorizing the community, so he was lynched. Now, in the Jacob Gardner, James Scurlock case, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Don Klein made the same statement against James Scurlock. He's terrorizing the community. As I've explained in my writings, in my complaints, everything, that as an attorney, as a prosecutor, and y'all listen to him from now on, he has ethical rules. You can say anything you want to, but an attorney who's speaking about a case has ethical rules he has to abide by. And if you've ever watched the old Dragnet case, remember Sergeant Friday says, just the facts?
Right.
Just the facts. That's all the prosecutor is ever supposed to give. He's not supposed to say, this guy has 23 past convictions. He's not supposed to go off on a tangent. So that's what's important about those. 100 years after, the government's position was still a black man's terrorizing the community. They don't need to make
which we understand that growing up in this country. Here's something that hit me, and as you were talking, and it resonated, that many of us are concerned. In recent cases, we saw where normally you call a grand jury, the way that Senator Chambers passed the law, when some person dies in the police custody. Right. In the past, has been one case, another case you call grand juries. In the latest situation, they put all these cases together, called one grand jury, and they checked all the boxes. So you wonder how efficient and effective when you got like 10 cases tried by one grand jury, when initially the law is drafted that you deal with a case. So help me understand what happened between back in the day when it was drafted, a one case, one grand jury versus grand jury dealing 10 or 20 at one time. How effective and efficient can they be? Is there some misinterpretation that I'm missing as a layperson?
No, I'm not aware of that situation. I wish I had more of the facts so I could speak to that. I
Okay.
can't speak to that. And what you tell me, I assume is true, but I'd have to see something in writing, or I
Yeah,
had
it
to
was in the
read up
paper,
on
and
it.
I read about that they tried more than one case. One grand jury dealt with more than one police custody's death, and that's still somewhat awkward when initially when it used to be one grand jury, whatever. Let me switch up
No,
again.
let me finish. The only thing I can speculate is that if the person who's putting on the grand jury is the county attorney as opposed to a special prosecutor, that may very well have happened. Does that
Okay,
make sense?
right.
Because you would have 2 or 3 different special prosecutors. You'd have a special prosecutor for each and every different case. So
Okay.
what you say may very well have happened.
So
Okay,
yeah,
go
let's
ahead.
check that out because that was raised in a number of articles and people talked about it, and so it came to my attention.
Yeah.
One of the things in one of the documents, obviously, you keep mentioning, you said it just now, the Will Brown thing. Help me understand how Will Brown, even though you said a little bit that happened September the 28th, relates to today in 2021, because I noticed that's one of the themes you keep coming back to in many of your articles and your documents. You explained a little bit earlier, but you're saying the cycle is still one and the same.
They haven't changed their mentality.
Gotcha.
Black man terrorizing
Gotcha.
Omaha. You know, that shocked me. I was shocked. You know who I felt sorry for? And my condolences go out to them if they ever see this, is James Scurlock's mother and father. They sitting there and they see the white Donald Klein county attorney saying on TV that their dead son, recently deceased, was terrorizing the community. Every time I think about that, my heart sinks. I'm like, that was something ethically you should not have said anyway. Even if you thought, my grandmother used to say, if you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all, okay?
Well, I also know at times you got to be very careful when you're getting paid by the public doing public working hours.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to come back to is that in one of the documents, you dropped a lot of the heavy hitters, meaning the people who are involved in our civil rights and so on. And I'm saying this very respectfully. And that kind of a stretch into things that you're working on. You threw out Rosa Parks and all these great leaders in our community, and you dropped that so quickly and fast. Help me to understand the link what you do and what they do.
We have to keep up their fight, and we're not doing that. We just, Malcolm X said there was house Negroes and field Negroes. The field Negroes have taken over. No, they haven't taken over. The house Negroes are running the show. You know, they just sit around and they're not, there's no fighting anybody anymore. Right. And I've been doing this. I've reached out to the NAACP, to the Urban League, to everybody else. Nobody has helped me, but I'm gonna keep on my fight until the last breath, because this is what we do. We keep fighting against racism until we defeat it, and we can defeat it, okay? So
I hear you.
Even if I don't get any help, I'm in court, and my thing is, I'm only one man, but over at the other table with the state, when they bring 3 or 4 people, only one of you can talk at a time. So it's even, okay? 3 of you ain't talking. Only one gets the microphone at a time. So bring on your best. And I tell them every time I go to court, I'm David and y'all Goliath. And you know who won that case, don't you? Okay.
You know what was interesting? I've been in meetings not only when I was on ACLU board and they kicked me off after missing 3 meetings and had to deal with a pack of hyena mentality and racists and so on. You know, you watch them plan their meetings. And years ago when I worked at Catholic Charities, the late Father Kellegar told me, he says, Aljamal, sometime before you go to the meeting's already been decided. It's just a formality of it. So we go into meetings thinking we won African-American, and you got a gang of folks over there who have the same rehearsed skit. And another example for me, and I remember very well in our plantation educational system, I've heard people talk about these parents that bring in, and they'll have that parent with their one child, and they have some kind of hearing, whatever that hearing is, and they got like 5 or 10 professionals in the room who are white, and the parent and the mom, the kid and the mom, they're trying to do the best they can, and they basically ramrolled or do something negative to the child and the family, and there's nobody in the room protecting their interests. And then when they bring in one of them handkerchief heads in there, and that's a good word for these handkerchief heads, they will oftentimes going to side with the oppressors on these families. So when you look at our educational system and you look at our system, when there's only one African American at the table, or Latino or Chicano or Native American or Asian at the table, and they're ganged up on by these folks, you know what kind of justice is going to be. One of the things I want to come back to, and I think we talked a little bit about it in the previous conversation, you represented the Black Panther Ed Ponderster and David Mondo, who spent many years in prison. And I do get to know Mondo when he was around, when he was walking among us. Now he's moved to the spirit world. We know the FBI was implicated in framing and murder of the members of the Black Panther Party. Actual fact, the police department in Chicago and the FBI paid over $1 million settlement to the Fred Hampton's family is a good example. Hush, hush mentality. We just found out the police department in New York and the FBI was involved in the assassination of Malcolm X, and that the person who committed the crime died a natural death, and the guy just got exonerated. So my question back is, how can we address these issues that are related to what happens in Omaha? Because there's been a lot of people who've been spending years in prison and jail, and some who've actually been killed. But how do we address these issues? We know that law enforcement is implicated and looking the other way. And we do know that J. Edgar Hoover told them not to disclose all those informers and people who were at the scene of Malcolm X's death. There was at least 5 law enforcement there, and a lot of that stuff redacted in those reports. But talk a little bit about that whole issue of law enforcement, FBI being involved in destabilizing the African-American community from your perspective.
Well, I do it on a case-by-case basis. And what happens is sometimes I find out that they've done something illegal and unethical, and I have to fight that in what's called a motion to suppress to get it kicked out. And now I've got the reputation that when they see my name on a pleading, they go, oh, blank, it's going to be a fight. You're right. You're trying to incarcerate another Black person. And the reason, and the only way we're going to turn it around is if the field Negroes get so upset and so animated that they're going to go ahead and they're going to start the mobilizing and doing more in terms of marching and doing more in terms of organizing. Okay, that's the only way it's going to turn around, because the house Negroes, remember, they're comfortable. They're living next to Massa. They just don't have to do anything. They don't, and you know who they are. I don't name names, but you know. So in that respect, I'm a field Negro. And in one of my cases, I submitted a law review article from 1964. And it was called The Retaliation of Attorneys Who Prosecute Civil Rights Cases. Okay? So in my case, I represented Mondo, I represent Poindexter. They have retaliated against me. As I told you before, I'm going to put this out as much as I can. They have a 5-year-old bar complaint against me, a 3-year-old bar complaint against me, and one's not even 1 year. Now, people go, well, you must have done something. You're a Black attorney. Well, if I did anything, why haven't they had a hearing on it? That should raise a red flag to people. I filed 8 civil rights discrimination lawsuits again. Don't you think they want me out the profession?
Right.
I keep telling them. I told one federal judge, the federal judges have been racist to me. Some state court judges have been racist to me. You know what? When I was a kid, the last time I was hurt by racism, I was about 10. I walked in to a restaurant and this white lady wouldn't sell me a cheeseburger because they didn't serve my kind. I cried. But now I'm a big boy and I have a law degree. I'm gonna make them cry. Okay. And I do. When they see me, they just go, shh, damn, we could keep this going forever. You don't understand. You as a white person, on the other side, don't understand what it's like being Black. Right. So, and the lawsuits I'm filing, they're never going to appoint me to a murder case in Douglas County, although they appointed me in the Bibbins case in 2000. Now they say in 2015, I'm not qualified to be appointed. But I'm doing this lawsuit to make sure that the younger, I know about 4 or 5 younger Black attorneys who would be excellent to represent people in murder cases, and they need to get the chance. So that's the reason I'm doing the lawsuit.
You know, as you mentioned that, and one of the things I've been citing for a number of years, I'm 66 years old. I've been in this city most of my life, except for the 2 years I was in Africa in the Peace Corps. I have never seen an African-American, maybe it might have been somebody of color, but never seen become one of those city counters. You know, they have them sitting in those vehicles counting the trucks as they go through, or cars.
Oh, yeah.
I've never seen a person of color sitting in one of those trucks. And again, I go to work every day, go different places. And I'm like, how's that possible? Because you appoint your cronies and so on. And again, that illustrates something. If somebody can tell you they've never seen them appoint somebody of color, I would like to ask them to give me the numbers that they do, especially if they're using city money or county money or public money. You need to have some sense of proportionality or representation, but how much qualifications does it take to be a counter or whatever you do when you're sitting in the car or the van or the truck or the SUV all day to look at vehicles? I mean, that's something that should raise the smell test in our community. I was going to say, go ahead.
Right. And let me say something. Let me when they had that 5-year bar complaint against me, the first thing I said to him was, you know, the Supreme Court requires that you give me a written letter of grievance, and they don't have it. They don't have a written letter of grievance against me, which details the actions against me. So that's why it's been open for 5 years. And the guy, the Office for Counsel for Discipline, violated federal law by writing me and telling me that's confidential from me. Who gets a letter saying they're investigating you and trying to disbar you, and 5 years later, it's confidential from you? They should have shot that over to me. It doesn't exist. Okay, go ahead.
You know, one time, and I share this because I write a number of letters as a private citizen. I buy my stamps by the book, not the rule, but the book, and so on. So I wrote to all of the legal people of color that I could recognize in the University of Nebraska Law School, who were professors and so on, administrators, to talk about how do we get more racial diversity in terms of the course content, because I found out from talking to a number of white attorneys that they offer no diversity classes per se, University of Nebraska Law School. They don't deal with poverty issues. For a while, I dealt with a lot of low income issues, and they don't deal with that. And so I wrote them, asked them, you know, how can we notch up this community collaboration? And you'd be surprised that not one of them responded. Well, one did respond. And she was nice and said, oh, how about such and such a day? And then when that day came close, she said, I got to cancel. I followed up and said, oh, are we still going to meet? Never know, didn't hear a peep from them. So my point is, how many African-American professors, law folks who have law degrees, who are out there who can help you or help other people deal with some of these racialized issues that we face in Nebraska, and particularly in Omaha? Because I don't see that. And I'm just basically asking, how do you evaluate our legal education system if a significant number of people in our community, they don't even know how to relate to or even talk to? Obviously, some of them never been in North and South Omaha, but talk a little more about your perspective of this legal system, the education.
None of them. Some of them, they just don't feel like they Black anymore. Some of them do. And I'm not going to, you know, minimize what I say. And I see them over at court and everything. You'd be surprised at how many other Black people don't want to talk to me.
Well, I know that for a fact, because I've been in environments where I've seen people, when they know you, and you know, they look down at their feet. I'm like, why are they looking at their feet? They don't even look at their feet when they're walking, but won't even say hello to you. Right. It's like, you got to be kidding. So I know that they remind me of that.
I don't worry about that. I don't worry about that. I have the greatest insurance in the history in the universe, and it's called God. If you're doing what God wants you to do and you're doing God's work, you don't have to worry about anything else. God has my back. And when we're talking about the retaliation they showed me over the years for my advocacy on behalf of Black people, it's the same as Rosa Parks. It's the same as Harriet Tubman. It's the same as everybody else. So I had to tell them that. I said, you know what? You're not going to get me to back down on this. These lawsuits I filed are going to remain, and we'll take them all the way up to the Supreme Court, which has drastically changed. And one of the things that me and you had talked about the other day was, and I got a mosquito in here, so I keep doing that. The one last mosquito of the summer got into
wait, hold it. After we say somebody sent that mosquito to you, kind of like the spider came visit me one day. I can tell he was sent by some evil demons to try to do some harm, but he didn't know that I had the force of the spirits of the ancestors with me. So that spider is no longer among us.
Okay, but here's the deal. One of the things I talked to you about when I was a young prosecutor, and I had this judge, and he was a very mean white judge. He was very mean to me, but he was mean to everybody. He was equally mean to everybody. And then years later, I figured out that guy actually liked me because he showed a certain meanness to me because he wanted me to do everything legally right.
Right.
If I messed up, he was on me. Anybody else mess up, I don't care about you. But you better do this right. So, and that made me a better attorney. And I kind of miss it. But one of the things he said is, here's what happens. When you get convicted in Douglas County, just as the place I prosecuted at, and the judge gives you a sentence, your sentence is this days, and you have a fine, a civil fine, a penalty. And say it's $500. The judge will say, well, I'm gonna let you sit out that day's your fine. Say it's $50 a day, so sit 10 days. So as a young prosecutor, I went to this judge and I said, Your Honor, I'd like you to let him sit out or her sit out their fine. He said, I'm not gonna do that. I said, what? He says, I'm not gonna do that. He says, listen, they're not gonna sit in my jail, eat my food, breathe my air, and then 10 days later get out and owe me nothing. By law, he was supposed to do that. And I thought, man, that's so logical. And he said, plus, the most important thing is you are putting the corrections people at risk. If you have 5 people sitting out a fine and you have 5 murderers, you got to watch 10 people. And the corrections officers would rather just watch the 5 murderers. So, and I told you how dumb this sounds, and it's always been done to me. And the field Negroes have to get together and go and talk to Justin Wayne and talk to Terrell McKinney. And I told Terrell this, and I shared this with you before. Suppose I'm walking down the street and I see you at Walmart or whatever store. And I say, hey Jamal, where's my money? My $500. You said, well, I ain't got it. Well, I said, well, come on home with me and live in my house for 10 days. That's what the jail system does. You can eat my food. I just have to watch you. But come on over to my house and live for 10 days. And then you don't owe me nothing. No. They should go to community service. They should get a bracelet put on them or some kind of monitor, something. The jailers should not have to watch them. They shouldn't. And the judge summed it up for me when he was yelling 30 years ago. This is not a debtor's prison. Because if you're poor and Black, it's more likely you're going to have to sit out your time.
Right, that's true.
And they charge you, they have to pay each day. That's coming out of our pocket. And then they tell us, well, we need more jail space over here. If you let the people out who's sitting out a fine, and then we'll talk, okay?
No, you know what? That's perfect sense. But the other concern, I think we can extend that concept to prison. I've noticed that and again, I'm not a researcher in the numbers, but I've seen some data here and there that African Americans and people of color get longer sentence, or they got poor legal representation, and they spend more time in jail for some crimes that white folks get less time out. The same thing with white collar crime. You go out and you steal $90 from someone, you're going to do a lot more time if you do white collar crime and steal $90. The actual fact, you get slapped on the hand, a little bit of the wrist, or sometimes massaging on the wrist, and you don't even get a record. And so we know that happens. And again, that's what our so-called criminal justice department should be about, is looking at the fines, looking at the sentences, and also making sure we don't make poor people spend an inordinate amount of time in systems just because they're poor.
Right.
We got about 15 minutes left or so, and there's a number of questions I want to get to you. How important has the Nebraska Bar Association been to you and help you in your work? not the Nebraska, but the Black Bar Association. There is a Black Bar
Nothing.
Association nationally and in state of Nebraska, right?
Neither one of them, the NBA and the Midlands Bar, has not reached out to me. They haven't helped me. I have a Black attorney who's representing me on some issues, some limited issues. And the reason he's representing me on only those limited issues, because if he represents me on the other cases, they are going to retaliate against him like they're retaliating against me. And I don't want that happening for him. But the other people, they can join in anytime they want to. But I don't hear them. I don't think they're going to be vocal, and I'm not expecting them to do anything.
By the way, I have no clue how many African-American attorneys are in Omaha or in the state of Nebraska. Do you know?
I think it was estimated about 150.
What?
Okay. Yeah, here, and there's people who are licensed here who are not here. They're outside the jurisdiction.
So when they
They
have
have a
degrees, they leave Nebraska.
Yeah, some of them, we may have 100 here and maybe 50 or 100
Outside the
outside
state.
in Nebraska. And maybe licensed somewhere else. Dual licensing.
Now, as a layperson who doesn't understand this bar thing and accreditation, you said you studied in Colorado and you passed the bar over there. Is there kind of reciprocity that you get to practice in Nebraska?
Yeah, it's like having a driver's license, but you could get multiple driver's license. As I know now, and I got to get mine renewed. But
the driver's license on your bar. What are you talking about?
My driver's license.
Okay. You confused me for a second. You switched up.
I just thought about that, but in any event, the bar license, you can get a number of them, reciprocity in other states. So I'm licensed in 2 states, Colorado and Nebraska.
Okay,
to make it short there. Okay.
Good. Explain, and I know this has been the news, and I know that, we tend to come out of this issue lately, and it's been very controversial with the governor. I just heard the NAACP make their position known. I was a little surprised that there were not more academicians who are scholars on theory of African-American culture and Black culture, so on, talking when they had their press conference the other day. But my question is, what is critical race theories from your perspective? And particularly when you talk about the governor and other white Republicans or conservatives talking about that. And I also notice the Democratic Party, and particularly those, are real quiet on this issue. So they're fighting and linking about critical race theories in the university and teaching. Explain to me, and I know it comes out of the legal field, explain to me from your vantage point, what are they talking about? Because a lot of us don't know what CRT is.
I have never seen a definition of that. I'm gonna be honest with you. They came up with that because my thing is, generically, they don't want to teach about slavery and other things. So they call it critical
castrations and everything else that's happened
right.
for 450 years.
But the fact of the matter is, unless the field Negroes get more vocal, all this is going to keep on happening. And by field Negroes, let me give you an example of the last time the field Negroes got really involved. That was in the 60s. When Mondo and them were those young people, as I read more about it and as I represent Ed Poindexter, I'm impressed with them. They were 18 to 28. And you have to remember, at that time period, back in that day, their parents who had grew up way before them didn't want them rabble-rousing, don't want you starting stuff, And they were just, when I was a kid, I was 10 years old, I remember this vividly. My superheroes were Superman, Batman. Then when the Black Panthers came out, my superheroes became the Black Panthers. Okay. That's how bad they were, because it was just, and let me give you a quick example. And I wanted to talk about one topic before I go, but I did a paper, a series of articles. I think I sent them to you on the Panthers and Mondo. They went from 2 people to 100,000 in 2 years. They went down to the California state capitol armed with AK-47s, and they were about business. When they showed up, the police stopped what they were doing. That's why J. Edgar Hoover said, we got to take these young people out. They were very organized. They were very intelligent. They were the field Negroes. They said, we are not taking this anymore from anybody else, this type of racism. And as a result of the Black Panther Party members for self-defense, that's their official name, they basically, what they did was they implemented that free breakfast program. But as a result of them filing legislation for the Black Panthers, they included white women in that group, affirmative action. They were going to give affirmative action just to blacks, but the legislative history shows that they included white women in that act too. This was in the 60s. So, and I have to, you could do some research on that for yourself, but the affirmative action for all people, including white women, was created by the Black Panthers going out and protesting. All right. So make that clear. But before I go, I wanted to tell you about my hearing on Monday with Don Klein. I sued him, and I sued him because he basically, since I've sued him, somebody attempted to extort me, and I filed a complaint with his office, and he refuses to prosecute that person. So in essence, he prosecuted for a very prominent Omaha family. He prosecuted a case twice for them, and the Judge Battalion dismissed both counts, a civil, what was essentially an embezzlement case. I'm saying this person committed fraud like they do out in California, attempted to extort me, and you're not going to prosecute it. And the issue I have is, in the Jacob Gardner case, you said, I'm not going to file any charges when protesters were outside your house. Then you went ahead and went, I think I better appoint a special prosecutor. In my case, he's saying, I'm saying you declined to file charges. So because of the conflict, me constantly suing Douglas County, it looks bad. It looks like this is my enemy. You have to appoint a special prosecutor. And he says, no, I don't. Okay, so we'll let the judge decide that on Monday. But my argument is, if you're Black, he won't file charges against anybody, which he didn't do for James Scurlock. He didn't do for me. That's how I feel about it. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But it seems like when you, that high profile case, he should have filed, my position is he should have filed those charges, because you may or may not have won on those charges, but when you come out within 24 hours or 48 hours, and even some of my friends who happen to be white have told me, I don't have any white friends, I have friends who are white, okay? They told me, said, yeah, that was pretty quick, Tim. So in my case, I go there on Monday and I'm saying, you got to appoint a special prosecutor because you can't punish your political enemies for filing lawsuits against you.
You know, as you mentioned, that the other case that happened that we don't talk a lot about lately is Bear Hills, a Native American guy who was to death. And what was unfortunate and crazy about that is his mom warned the police department and folks that he was not, doing well, and had some mental health issues. Next thing you know, he's dead. And then you got a number of police officers who were implicated and who was fired. But what was interesting is that there was no charges brought against them per se, even though they didn't follow their own standard operating procedure, and they tased the person. And I participated in a community forum where there were a number of people who were very angry about that. And there was also a Native American judge there who kind of defended Don Klein's office on that, because he said something like, one of the things that he has to do is have a chance of winning. If he doesn't have a chance of winning, he's not going to pursue it. But I do know that a lot of people in the room were upset even with that conversation, but at least there was a conversation, and we don't always have that dealing with people who die in police custody.
And you asked me what the field Negroes can do, you and me, is we need to organize and set up more forums.
Right.
Dave Pantos is running against Don Klein for Douglas County attorney. Remember, Don Klein was appointed and he ran and he's elected as a Democrat. Now he's a Republican, all right? So Dave Pantos is a Democrat. And Dave Pantos, and I talked to him on occasion, what I want is for people to set up a forum for these two candidates to talk. The Black people, that's the most important position in our community. They determine how much jail time we get. They determine how we're treated in the judicial system. They determine the plea bargains. And as I told you before, plea bargains are a form of eliminating criminal cases. 99 and 95% of the cases end in the plea bargain. The problem is when the plea bargains are disproportionately against African Americans, and they get harsher sentences and they get harsher plea bargains. And we need to monitor that because, as I told you before, jail is the new slavery.
Right.
And we're not as active as we should be. We need to be setting up more forums. The Field Negro should have a forum every 2 months. And Don Klein should come there and explain himself. Explain yourself, Don. How you handle that case? Explain your statement of terrorizing the community. Explain your Republican Party now. Black people don't ask those questions anymore as leaders. I couldn't believe that blacks in the 60s would allow this to happen. Maybe I'm just thinking back, but we've got to be more organized, and I'll work with you so we can set up some stuff. Okay.
Well, I know we're getting close to the end, and I want to just thank you for being on this show and sharing some information. And one of the things that I'm always concerned is when we have so-called Black media or Latino media, Chicano media, and so on, how well are they covering the issues in our community? And back in the day, we used to have a lot of community forums and engagement, and we learn from each other informally as well as formally when we get together and talk. We may not always agree, which we're not supposed to be all the way agreed unless we're robots or something. But what we have to do is engage each other to be critical thinkers so that when something comes up, you can inform yourself and work with it. Go ahead.
Let me add something. When I wrote that article, "Is Douglas County Court Racist?" 2 days later, I got a letter. It appeared in Omaha Star. 2 days later, I got a letter from Nebraska Chief Justice Michael Hevikin. Oh, we're going to take care of this because he saw it in the Star. The Star is no longer doing those kind of articles. They ran a series of articles for me for Mondo. They don't do that anymore. They don't advocate anymore like they used to in the past under other leadership. When I wrote that article, they contacted me and they were nervous. When you go out and you have a lot of publicity, the judicial system gets nervous. So it's our job to shine the light on the racism in the system.
Right, now, I agree. And one of the things, there's an African proverb that says, a baby in his mom's carrying skin who doesn't cry will soon starve to death. We got a number of folks sitting around here, slow death, and they're not challenging our system. And again, when you wake up and you're conscious, you have to begin to challenge the system and push back. So very important. Timothy Ashford, I really appreciate you being on the show with us today, and hopefully we can have you back again. And we're going to do more of these conversations through more, because part of our role is to bring people together, get information out, because it's obvious we're walking on these different silos and we have these different lanes, and oftentimes we don't come together. One of the factors that, again, I can relate to very strongly is that if we collectively come together as a group, we'll do much more. We cannot be individualistic in our behaviors because we're impacted collectively as a group. It is not you symbolically individually, as you belong to a group. And so this becomes a very important issue that we need to address. So I really appreciate you being on this edition today to help us bring these issues to light. But thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm going to reach out to you. We've got to get a forum set up in January and February so Don Klein and Dave Pantos can address the Black community. We've got to sit them down and say, okay, what you gonna do for us, okay?
And I agree. And I also know that it's hard to represent a city that's 33% people of color, and you're never going into North or South Omaha. You don't have any people of color or any substance on your staff. But thank you very much for appearing here. And we hope you've enjoyed this. And again, if you have any comments, be sure to submit them to moreomaha.org is our email address and our website. So you can catch up with us through that. So we thank you and hope you can view more and give us suggestions on how we can improve what we do. So thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Barocco.
Okay. Take care. Bye.